Hey guys, Dan here. First video on this new channel. I mean, I've done some streams, but this is the first actual video. If you don't know me, I'm typically doing sim racing on my channel called Dan Suzuki, and I cover a lot of tech stuff on that channel, so I thought we'll do it on the flight sim channel as well. And we'll have a look at the new AMD Ryzen 9800X 3D, the new best gaming processor that you can buy. And we'll do a few benchmarks comparing it to the 7800X 3D and the Intel 14900K. So what's new with the latest AMD? Basically, it can clock higher. The 3D cache is below the processor, so to say, so the temperatures are a bit lower. You can overclock it, which is very nice. I also show you how to overclock it very easily to get a nice 5% boost in performance. And I think every chip should be able to do it. I have one chip that I deleted with direct die cooling, but I have a second chip that also works perfectly fine with that overclock. Prices, I mean, in Germany, the new one is 529 euros. The old one currently 460-ish for the 7800X3, so it's a no-brainer which one to get. But I would say I'll quickly show you the scenarios that I benchmarked. I did two scenarios. One, a Phoenix A321 over New York to see like a little worst case scenario, and then another one I did like a smaller plane and flew over the area around Bad Durkheim in Rhineland-Palatinate, so more rural scenario. And then I did both with frame generation off and frame generation on. By the way, if you're curious how you can easily benchmark Microsoft Flight Simulator, there are basically three things you need. You need a replay that you can replay. For that I use a flight recorder, works very well. It's a free tool, you can get it on flightsim.to. I can put the link in the description. You can just record your flight and then obviously save it. And I've done that for my New York flight here. And then if you click on replay, it basically replays your flight. I mean, it's not perfect, like some of the settings might be different. You can see, for example, here the gears go in original speed, even though I'm fast forwarding. But pretty much also if you do this quickly, you see the textures didn't load, so you have to wait some time till it loads and then play it. But if you then also go to weather and go to one of the presets, for example, I use the cinematic weather from SimFX, which is a fixed weather condition, and then I also use a fixed time. So I think I did this at 16:15, November the 9th. Just make sure you have the same settings and then pause the time here. You can also do that with the in-game time and weather. I use Flow Pro for this menu, but it works with anything. And then you just play the replay, record it with cap, long landing. my RAAS plugin is a little bit confused by this, but yeah, this is how you can easily benchmark Flight Simulator and get reproducible or relatively reproducible results. But I'd say we'll start with the New York numbers, frame generation off. You see performance on all of these CPUs is pretty bad. Oh, by the way, before I forget, GPU is a 4090. But if we look at the Intel chip, we get an average of 37.4. The 7800X 3D slightly lower, 37.1. But the 1% lows and 0.2% lows are actually a little bit higher on the AMD, but pretty much negligible. I would say these two processors are nearly the same speed. But the new 9800X 3D is quite a bit faster. I mean, it's only 7 FPS in average, but like if we look at the baseline of 37.1 and then add 7% to that, it's quite the difference. And also the 1% low and 0.2% lows are significantly higher than on the older two chips. And then if you overclock it, you get a nice little extra boost on performance that pushes all numbers slightly higher. If we look at the numbers with frame generation turned on, we see a very similar picture, just overall higher in absolute FPS. It's like nearly double the FPS in all scenarios. And in most scenarios, I think frame generation works very well on Microsoft Flight Simulator, so I can recommend to turn it on. There is the rare occurrence where the frame generation glitches a little bit and gives you weird artifacts, but that happens very rarely from my experience, and it just gives you a smoother feel of the game. But again, both the 7800X 3D and the Intel chip, very comparable in average, and the 1% and 0.2% lows, and the 9800X 3D being definitely faster than the older two. And if you do the overclock, you get a nice little extra boost. Interestingly, over proportional gain in FPS with the OC here when we look at that scenario. Then if we have a look at the more rural area, I was using the Diamond DA40 TDI. Is that a diesel plane, or what is that TDI standing for? Over the area around Bad Durkheim with frame generation off, we see 7800 X3D at an average of 91.1, the Intel at 93.2, and then the 9800 X3D being significantly higher with the 1% lows nearly matching the average of the older processor, especially if we look at the overclock numbers, 88.3 compared to 91.1. So quite a nice boost here. And if we turn frame generation on, again, very similar to the scenario over New York, basically double the FPS with the OC 9800 X3D at nearly 240 FPS on average compared to the 7800 X3D at around 200. And also 1% loss, 0.2% loss, significantly higher. This is typically the number that's interesting because in the end, whether you have 240 FPS or 200 FPS, you won't be able to tell the difference. But you will definitely be able to tell the difference in those scenarios where it begins to stutter a little bit, where the frames drop. And that is typically where these 1% low and 0.2% low numbers are interesting to look at. All these benchmarks were done on Windows 11 24H2 build, which does give a nice little performance boost to AMD processors. The RAM that was being used on AMD was 32 gigabytes, 6000 megahertz CL30. On the Intel, I was using 32 gigabytes at 7800 megahertz CL36. And basically, the 9800 X3D is the CPU to get at the moment if you want the best gaming CPU that you can buy. Let's say we'll quickly hop into the BIOS. I mean, every BIOS looks slightly different, but it will give you an idea what you need to do to get into the menu to do the overclock. And it should look somewhat comparable on other manufacturers, but just check your manual where you find those PBO menus, and then you can copy these settings and try around with it. So how to get into the BIOS? Typically, it's pressing the delete key like 5 seconds after you press the power button. Just smash the key until you're in the BIOS. Might be a different key, F2, F10, F12, but most mainboards actually use the delete key. And after you've done that, you will probably be in some sort of easy mode. As you can see here on this Aorus board on the top, you can switch to advanced mode. And then you want to go to a tweaker settings or CPU settings. Like for example, here it's called advanced CPU settings. So you want to click there, or you can also just search for PBO or precision boost overdrive. So when you're in there, you see we get the precision boost overdrive option. So go in there. You will have to enable it typically. So it should be auto or disabled. And then there should be a setting like enabled or advanced. In the case of the Gigabyte mainboard, we want to go to advanced here. And then there are 2 settings you need to change to get this overclock that I did. The maximum CPU boost clock override, positive 200, which gives you a 200 megahertz higher boost clock. And then the second setting is in the curve optimizer. You want to set this to all cores. Then the optimizer sign to negative and the magnitude to 20. I mean, if you get a very good chip, you can also probably do 30. If you get a worse chip, maybe try 15 or 10. Basically, the higher this number, the more undervolted your CPU will be. So the cooler it will run, which will then allow you higher overclocks of the boost. But like negative 20 and the 200 megahertz boost worked on both my chips. I have one that is running stock and one that I deleted, like remove the heat shield and then do direct die cooling. And both of the CPUs do this overclock perfectly fine. You can probably push it a bit more if you wanted to, but I just wanted to do an easy overclock, see how it impacts the benchmark. Like I said, on other mainboard, it might look slightly different in the BIOS, but the settings will have the same name. So just search for Precision Boost Overdrive or PBO and then apply these 2 settings. Okay, so that's it for the video. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel, like the video to not miss any future videos. We'll do more guides for flight simulation, more tech stuff, more streams. So everything flying will be on this new channel. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye bye.